Good morning, buenos dias. Steve already introduced me, but let me just add a little bit more to that introduction. And then I want to present just a little bit, but more than anything, I think I want to frame this issue of legal remedies and working as a lawyer with immigrant populations in Minnesota right now. And then I'll be interested in hearing from you about why you're here and what are some of the issues that are of concern to you, or what are the things that maybe you're observing or that you're interested in. Because I can easily talk for 40 minutes, but I think it would be most useful to me and hopefully to you to be able to focus in the conversation. The topics are broad. There's a lot of different issues facing immigrants right now, and you can pick the social context, the cultural context, or you can pick the system, whether it's healthcare or the legal system or the criminal justice system, housing, education, employment, and we could spend easily an hour in any one of those. What Steve was talking about in terms of of taking a guerrilla approach to representing immigrants in Minnesota right now, it has not been a choice about the way that I would prefer to represent immigrants. It has not been a choice about the sorts of remedies that I think we find or that we're looking for in terms of immigrants in Minnesota today. And the reason for that is that, we live in a country that has a long history of and development of legal norms, our system of laws, the way that law is created, and the way that law is applied within our communities, and certainly the way that it applies to individuals. And we live in a highly regulated society in the United States. And I think you can just take a moment to think about your day so far today. And so much of what you have done, and so much of so many of the choices that you've made already this morning are governed by our laws. And I can't think of a place in the United States, and whether it's a private space, a public space, a government space, a rural place, or an urban place that's not regulated by laws. And when you're at home, laying in bed, looking up at the ceiling, there are laws that either actually intrude upon that space, or there are laws that attempt to intrude upon that place. So even into the most, I think, personal, private, or what we might think are private spaces in our society, the law intrudes. And it just makes me think, like, if I was in the audience, would I want to be in that room? Or would I want to be in this room? Right?
Boy, let's go.
Anyway, but so I want you to spend just a moment thinking about that. Driving, getting dressed, the food that you ate, the car that you drove, the place where you parked, if you took public transportation, or even if you walked this morning. So much of what you've done already is governed by law. So it's surprising that immigrants, and especially undocumented immigrants in Minnesota, frequently find themselves in this gray area where the law is not clear. where the law is ambiguous. And I think the challenge for me and for so many other legal professionals, for attorneys and judges and prosecutors and the United States Department of Homeland Security, which is the umbrella organization under which the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service, what used to be called INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, that's the space that we inhabit, this area that's a gray area about the sorts of norms or the types of behaviors that we expect or that we prohibit. And so it requires this approach that when I was talking with Stephen, that I describe as a guerrilla approach to immigrant law, and it's just a necessity. So let me give you an example, and this is I give this example because I see this example time and time again. But I think it illustrates this gray area and the challenge, I think, for legal professionals. And no doubt the challenge for educators and for social service workers and almost everybody else who has to deal with immigrants or who crosses paths with immigrants. So let's say you're an undocumented immigrant in Minnesota. And let's not talk about, whether it's right or wrong that you're unlawfully present in the United States. Let's put that aside for now. Let's just talk about an individual, a man or a woman, who has a family and maybe some children, and in all likelihood has some sort of a community network, belongs to a church, maybe has siblings or parents, cousins, some sort of an extended family network, and the family frequently is what I would refer to as a mixed status family. And what that means is we have our individual who is undocumented, maybe is in a relationship with a person who has lawful permanent status or lawful permanent resident status. And then they have 2 U.S. citizen children, both of them under the age of 3. And they rent an apartment, maybe in Sartell, or they're splitting a house maybe with another family. And they're working, let's say that the work is in the service industry. So maybe in a restaurant or a hotel or some other service environment. Fairly typical situation for an immigrant in Minnesota. That person, by necessity, has to work. But how does an undocumented immigrant work in Minnesota now? And there's a couple different options, all of which fall into this gray area. So one of them that's fairly common is a person will work on a cash-only basis. And there's a lot of employers that won't do that, but there's a lot of employers that will pay cash. There's frequently it's an unspoken understanding that the worker is undocumented, even if there's no specific discussion about that. And maybe that person comes to that job through their own network. They know somebody who works there. That person brings them to the manager or the owner of the business, and they get hired on a cash-only basis. Well, in Minnesota, there's a couple of problems with working on a cash-only basis, and just a few of them. One of them is that if you're an employer and you have employees, you have to maintain workers' compensation insurance. And you may not be able to make a workers' compensation claim or be able to, you may be in violation of your policy, your workers' compensation policy, if you have somebody working for you on a cash-only basis. You also have to present certain documentation to be able to be employed in Minnesota. And if you're working on a cash-only basis, presumably you have not presented that information. You also have to do withholdings, tax withholdings, FICA, Medicare, and other withholdings for taxes, both at the municipal level, state level, federal level. And presumably, if you're paying an employee or if you're an employee working on a cash-only basis, they're not doing those withholdings. And it goes on from there. There's a number of different of other factors also that operate in this gray area. That's one way that a person is working. Another way that a person might be working is that they've presented either real documents with another identity, and frequently those documents are purchased. There's a lot of talk about identity theft. You hear this all the time, and I think all of you, if you've heard of the internet and if you've used it, somebody has tried to sell you some sort of identity theft protection at some point. So this issue of identity theft is really out there. And there's a lot of rhetoric about identity theft and immigrants, undocumented immigrants. And what I observe fairly regularly is that it's usually not as simple as that. When I think about identity theft, I think about going out for drinks with my friends. And I visualize like somebody's purse or a wallet being sort of like stolen, and somebody taking your identification and using it for some nefarious purpose. And that's usually not the case. What I see fairly regularly are individuals, U.S. citizens, who will happily sell their identification for money. And this is, I think, there's a whole black market for IDs and for Social Security numbers that exists out there. And when, let's say, I take my driver's license and my Social Security card and I sell it to you, well, it's no longer identity theft. It's identity purchase. It's identity gift, maybe. But let's say, okay, so now I have my documents, and these are authentic. The other is, the fictitious documents, the made-up, fake documents. And in the Twin Cities, or at least in Minneapolis, for a long time, and I don't think this is true any longer because it's just become sort of urban legend. But it used to be that on Nicollet and Lake, there's a Target store. And you could go to the parking lot of the not Target, but Kmart store. But you could go to you can go to the parking lot of the Kmart store and you could buy documents, fake documents. And like I say, I don't think it happens anymore, but I think it was true for a time. Now I think it's just urban legend. But you can get fake documents. And I've seen a lot of fake documents, and some are pretty okay. Some are really unbelievably bad. I mean, they look homemade. Right? But this is one way that you can also obtain documentation, is the fictitious documents. Okay, so there's a couple different ways that you can then fill out your I-9 form. Does everybody know what an I-9 form is? Well, if you've ever had a job that you got by presenting documents, you have seen the I-9 form at some point. And the I-9 form is an immigration form. And what it is, it's the form that you use to qualify yourself to work lawfully in the United States. And it's a form, has a list A, list B of documents that you have to present. And in most cases, the employer understands that they can't tell you what documents to present, although there's employers out there who'll tell you what they want to see, even though that's unlawful. But you fill out this form, and you put in, your driver's license and a Social Security card, And then there's a little box that asks you about your immigration status. And there's a couple of different choices on there. And I'll talk about two of them. One of them is that if you present a driver's license and a social security card, the choice that you get then is that you have to check off a box that says, I am a US citizen. And I don't think that's language, but that's essentially what it asks. And then there's another box that says that I am a lawful permanent resident. And it asks you for your green card number, your alien registration number. And when I came to the United States, the green cards actually were green. I have one of the green cards. They're not green anymore.
They are green. They are green again.
Oh, they're green again. I haven't seen a green one yet. And but frequently referred to as a green card, or among a lot of Latinos, it's known as a mica. And there's other names for it as well. So when you have the fake documents, and you're in this gray area because you need to work because you've got your 2 kids at home, you've got to pay rent on your place, you've got to defend yourself. What do you do? Do you take the cash option? Do you try to do that? Do you get a fake driver's license or maybe a real driver's license that's somebody else's and a social security number? And whether the social security number is real or fake? And do you check the box with the US citizen? Or do you get a fake green card and maybe some other type of ID, social security number, and you check the second box and put in your fake alien registration number? What do you do? And there's no guidebook for this because all 3 of those choices are unlawful. But you got to eat, and your children have to eat. You need transportation, which gets us into a whole different thing. Because how many of you have been to Sartell? Yeah. How's public transportation in Sartell? Is there like light rail out there, or a bus that comes by every 7 minutes? Yeah. I mean, I think that illustrates. I think if you work frequently in rural Minnesota, especially even in the Twin Cities, where I think we have a fairly robust public transportation system, it's frequently impossible to maintain employment without a car. So we got to pay for the car, we got to pay insurance, and we got to put gas in that thing. So here we have all these choices that are in the gray area. And somebody comes to me, let's say they've been working, and they made one of those choices. And now that person is either in deportation proceedings, or they got married to their lawful permanent resident partner. Now they're spouses. And so I have a series of questions as a lawyer about, okay, so how can we normalize your immigration status? And so I launch into this whole series of questions about, the family relationship. When did you get married? When did you get your lawful permanent residence status? To the person who's here undocumented, when did you come into the United States? How many times have you come into the United States? Did you cross in the desert? Did you, cross in Nogales, across the river? Or in San Diego, did you walk across the bridge? How did you get into the United States? And did you have documentation? Or were you what we call an iwi, which is somebody who entered without inspection, iwi. And did you get stopped by Border Patrol? Did you get stopped by immigration? Have you had any contact with immigration? Have you had any contact with police? If you had contact with police, what happened? If you were picked up in the desert by Border Patrol, what did they do to you? Did they just turn you back at the border? Or did they take you somewhere and photograph you and fingerprint you? And did they just fingerprint you? Or did they also photograph you? You start going to, and that's 2 minutes of an interview that's usually a couple of hours to just get the sort of and what I'm looking for is, can we qualify this person for immigration benefits, whatever those might be. But then we run into this situation with the employment, and there's a whole series of questions about the employment. And frequently the discussion is, okay, so you've been working, you've had a number of different jobs. When you get your job, what documents do you present? And here's where it gets weird. And it gets weird for me as a lawyer. And let me illustrate how I think this is weird. Because I think lawyers, especially in immigration, have a twisted way of looking at the world. And so I'm going to let's step away from the conversation we're having now, and I would give you this example, which I think is, for me, is always the best illustration of why the work that I do is a little bizarre. And this also, I think, maybe illustrates, why, I talk about this gray area. But in asylum cases, and every once in a while you'll get a client who walks in with a good asylum claim. But one of the claims that people can make is that they were persecuted. And one of the ways that people are persecuted, for their religious beliefs, for their political beliefs, and so on, is they're detained and then they're tortured. And I've been in this situation a number of times where somebody has walked into the office and over time they've related this story about things that happened to them in their home country and the reason why they're fearful, why they have this well-founded fear of returning to their country. And then they'll go into this discussion about how they were interrogated and tortured. And as a lawyer, when you hear that, you want to clap. You want to jump up and down and say, right on, you were tortured. You're happy about it because it's one of the things that can really make for a good asylum claim. So we have this really bizarre way of thinking, where somebody walks in and relates this horrible, horrifying story of torture, and you couldn't be happier because this person was tortured. And not because they were tortured, but you think like, okay, good. These are good facts. Asylum cases are very, very difficult to prove. Very, very difficult to have a successful asylum claim. And so when you get facts like that, torture. And by the way, I have a videotape of it. Even better. We can, not only can we prove it, but we can document it. Or not only can we, sort of claim this, but we can document it. It's a really bizarre way of thinking. But understandable in that situation. So, let's go back to the story now. So here we have this person who has worked, and now we're getting into this discussion about, under what terms did you work? So when somebody says, well, okay, I worked for cash, which is the most sort of black market way to work in this country, is, you get paid cash, and you might know your supervisor's first name and have a cell phone number. And that's pretty much your employment relationship. You show up at your job every day, but there's no, the normal things that I think so many of us take for granted about our employment relationship. Application forms and the I-9 form, maybe some sort of, you get a brochure or some information about, if you work X number of hours or after a certain period of time, you can qualify for benefits or vacation time, or after 90 days, your probationary period, you're going to get an increase of 15 cents an hour or whatever. All these things that we take for granted. A training program where a training person comes in and tells you how to do your job. All these things, that I think are so commonplace in the American employment marketplace, non-existent for so many immigrants. And also, incidentally, job security, or the feeling that, if you're being abused at work, that you have some recourse. And I think so many of the things that I think we take for granted, that we might take for granted about our employment relationships, are frequently absent. So, cash only, and I couldn't be happier, because there's all these pitfalls. And let me illustrate this, and then I'm going to try to turn this conversation back on you guys. But if the person has presented a fake green card and a fake immigration registration number, A number, and presented a fake social security number, then you're still happy. Maybe not as happy as if they worked just on a cash basis, but you're still happy. And the reason you're not as happy is because now you have this issue about somebody using a false ID. Whether it's if they're using a false ID with their own name, or if they're using a false ID with a fake name, or maybe they're using real documents that they bought from somebody, but in somebody else's name. So we've got these issues which can raise these criminal law issues and possible criminal penalties. And also, if that person is trying to adjust their status from unlawful to lawful immigrant, it also creates some barriers, potentially. And then the last option, which is that they work having claimed that they're a United States citizen. And unfortunately, this is becoming the most commonplace way that people are working, undocumented immigrants are working, is that they're using a driver's license and a social security number and claiming that they're a United States citizen. Which is all, the upside to that for the immigrant is that it makes you look as normal as possible, right? Because you're not pulling out immigration documents, you're not sort of, putting a bright light on yourself saying, hey, I'm an immigrant. You're claiming U.S. citizenship, and even if your language skills are not very good, you're making this, you're indicating, I'm one of you. You don't have to look at me like an immigrant. I have to show fewer documents. I don't have to go through this charade that I'm an immigrant with fake status. I'm going to claim that I'm a U.S. citizen. The problem with that, for me, and this is where it's a little bit of a bummer to see that, is that under immigration law, there's certain things that you can't do. One of them is you can't make a false claim to U.S. citizenship. So one of the other things we ask clients about is, have you ever voted? And not too many, but a surprising number of people have either voted or tried to vote. Because I think it's America. We're a democratic country, and frequently immigrants are really, really motivated. I certainly was when I was a new arrival in this country. But you're frequently motivated to participate in this democratic process, especially if you come from a country where you don't have that. But one of the things you can't do is make a false claim to U.S. citizenship. In an immigration, what that means is a permanent bar to any immigration benefit. So, and permanent is permanent. There's no waiver. For some bars, there's waivers. So you can say, okay, I made this mistake, now I'm asking for forgiveness so we can get on with my immigration case. With a false claim to U.S. citizenship, there's no waiver. And it's a lifetime bar. So you can never adjust your status. Now, it's not always that simple, but at the end of the day, the bottom line is here we are in this gray area. So out of that scenario, how do I talk to immigrants who come into my office, with other issues, or with, or maybe who are thinking, okay, my son who is a U.S. citizen, I'm undocumented, my son who is a U.S. citizen will turn 21 a year from now. And at the moment he turns 21, he can apply for me. He can adjust my status. I can adjust my status through him. So what do I tell that person when they're looking ahead? And this is where it's a gray area, because I say, okay, you have three choices. You can work for cash. You can claim you're a immigrant, a lawful permanent resident, or you can pretend to be a U.S. citizen. So the three choices are unlawful. All three of those break the law in one way or another. But I want to keep my client from having facing negative legal consequences. So what do you do? Okay, so out of the three crimes that you can commit, which one would you recommend your client commits so that they can eat or maintain their home? Okay, and and I'm dramatizing a little bit here, but that really becomes the choice. And so all of a sudden, you see yourself not as a lawyer with a suit and a tie sitting in an office with a client. You see yourself as like a black hooded ninja trying to navigate the gray areas of the law. It really does become this sort of guerrilla sort of approach. Because, what I would tell my clients is I would say, well, I can't recommend that you do anything illegal. But given the choices that you have, here's the choices that have the least punitive legal consequences. And as lawyers, that's our job, is to be able to tell our clients that. So I can't say, okay, here's the way you do it. And when you go to the Kmart parking lot, you're looking for a black Dodge Durango. Okay. Always approach from the passenger side. You can't do that, right? And here's the name of a restaurant that's hiring undocumented immigrants right now. You can't do that. But you can say, okay, well, given your choices, here's the legal consequences of each one of those choices. But it's a bizarre thing to do that. And this is where I say, I started out saying that, you're laying in bed looking at the ceiling and the law governs what you're doing, right? Highly regulated. And here on this other, this example that I think I've probably taken too much time to lay out for you, the law is not so clear. And the choices are not clear. And among all the choices that immigrant might have in front of them, none of them are desirable. None of them resolve the underlying issue. So what do you do? And I think the thing that I think is hardest for me is to observe people grappling with these choices. Or observe people who, without knowing, made the wrong choices and now are facing the consequences. And I think the most painful part of that is that almost in every case, you're looking at somebody across the desk or across the table from you who really wants to do the right thing. Who, given a choice, would do anything, would pay anything, would go anywhere, would sacrifice anything to just have a right choice in that mix. And and I think that's what makes it, I think, such a compelling issue in a place, in a country where we are so closely governed by this system of laws, that our laws are failing every day, all the time, on these issues. Okay. Well, so that's the framework, I think, for this discussion about, sort of the guerrilla approach to immigrant law and the laws that I think that affect immigrants. And I'm not, it's what's interesting about that choice to me is that most of the stuff that we talked about has nothing to do with immigration law. It has to do with state law and federal law governing employment and documentation and so on. There are some immigration elements in there, but it's more complex than that. Any questions, comments, remarks, anything that is bugging you about, and if something's bugging you about what I said, I'm happy to hear that as well. I'll be interested in any counterpoints that you might have. But
Jorge, I wanted to know why, let's say the person chooses to file for immigrant status through their son, like you just mentioned. Why is that a detriment?
Well, trying to get legal status through your U.S. citizen child is not detrimental, but I don't think I'm getting your question.
Yeah, why would that be a bad choice?
No, I think that's a good choice. I think that's the right choice. The choices that I was talking about really are more in this employment context. That if you have, these three choices, you're going to work for cash, you're going to work you're going to make a false claim to U.S. citizenship, or you're going to pretend that you're a lawful permanent resident with fake documents. Interestingly, so just so you know, by the way, I think out of those three choices, being the fake lawful permanent resident is the best choice. You know, and again, it's sort of counterintuitive that you would think that. But that's the best choice among the three, I think. Other lawyers might have a different opinion on that. But it's the one, to me, that has the lowest potential for negative legal consequences to flow from that. Stephen?
Jorge, could you elaborate a little bit on the difference between your guerrilla approach and other immigration lawyers' approach to doing this kind of work?
You know, my approach is different. Let me say first that all immigration lawyers face these choices or these scenarios fairly regularly, and certainly those lawyers that work with, especially in the Latino community. The Latino community, I think, has the highest rate of undocumented immigrants in Minnesota. Not all immigration lawyers work with the Latino community. Not all lawyers, immigration lawyers, work with individuals. There's immigration lawyers that specialize in employment-based, and so generally their clients are, you know, the employer, not always the individual. And so there are immigration lawyers that don't deal, they're not as close to these issues as those issues are present in my practice and a lot of other immigration lawyers. But, you know, for me, I think I just take a realistic approach. Because there are lawyers also who try to avoid these topics, I think. And I think because, you know, we have an ethical obligation, I think, to play by the rules, right? And one of the tenets of being a lawyer is you can't promote or participate in a fraud. You can't, do anything that is contrary to the law. And that's why, you know, the advice is always couched in the context of, well, here are your choices, and here are the consequences of those choices from a legal perspective. And so, you know, you would never say, this is what you should do. But I think you want to help your client understand that framework, that legal framework, as ambiguous as it might be, you want to understand where that person stands within that legal framework. And what I tell people is I say, okay, I know you have difficult choices, and I know you're going to make those choices, or you've already made them. And that's why you're here. But I want you to understand what your situation is, and I want you to have your eyes wide open about the potential negative consequences that you're facing. So, you know, that's the way I approach it, is just to be, pragmatic and understand that my clients are making those choices, that this is happening in our communities. And for me to pretend otherwise, I think I'm not doing my job as a legal advocate.
I was just curious how often you get clients who are just seeking advice, but not actually in legal trouble. And then also, I have a further question, kind of, do you find that it's hard to make a living helping clientele that don't have money to pay you necessarily?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me take the first one, and the first one is hardly ever.
They're usually in trouble.
Yes.
Okay.
Nobody ever shows up in my office and says, you know, I just wanted to say hello. I just wanted to, see how your day's going. No, I mean, my practice, we're like the emergency room. Nobody comes unless you got a stab wound or something happened. And so, frequently the folks that are coming to my office are in crisis. Not always. I mean, sometimes there are people who, like the scenario that I painted is fairly common. Somebody got married to a United States citizen or a lawful permanent resident, and now they want to come in and see, in this situation, can I adjust my status? Can I legalize my status? So it's a little bit of a mix. On your second question, I've grappled with this question for a long, long time. The question about, the cost of legal services and clients' ability to pay, right? Because, one is here and frequently with the demographic that I'm working with, the other is here. I've been this year I will have been a lawyer 15 years. And I don't think there's been a day in the 15 years that I haven't thought about that question. But here's where I've ended up. And we used to have this discussion openly all the time when I was working at Centro Legal. Centro Legal was a nonprofit law office, very similar to legal aid, where we served low-income Latinos across the state of Minnesota on a variety of different legal issues, immigration among them. And and there was a group of people within the office that said, we shouldn't charge anything for these services. We should give it all away. And there was another group in the office that says, our experience is that if you don't charge, clients don't value the services, and so you end up having to babysit clients and handhold them all the time. Otherwise, they don't follow through. And and I think there's maybe some truth to both those things. But I think the thing that I learned is that you can't underestimate individuals based on their economic status. And I think, to do so is a little disrespectful. To say, you're poor, and you can start there, and a lot of things can follow. You're poor, you're probably uneducated, or just stupid. Or, and so what you need is somebody to do things for you, or to take care of you. You can't deal with these complicated issues on your own. And certainly you can't pay for them. And I've taken the approach that people are resourceful. And the other thing I think, that I think the clients understand, and that's that, these things have value. That if by doing some legal work, I can adjust somebody's status, or better, that person is detained by immigration and I can get them out of detention and adjust their status. Those things have value, enormous value, tremendous value. So, but it's always a struggle. It's always a struggle. And I've been thinking about that all the time, because I have to think about, how I set my fees and how does that work, within the sort of the range of what people charge in the legal world. And people charge a lot. I'm not at the top of the field. I'm not at the bottom. I think I'm in the middle.
I just want to add a couple of comments about some of the things that you have said. I work for Catholic Charities, and I was managing an immigration program at some point. Some of the clients that will come to the program will actually, we didn't charge fees at that time. And some of the clients that will come to us for advice, they wanted to give me something. Why do you have this $50 for a coffee or just have it? And it was difficult to say no, not because for one I couldn't really take that money, but they will feel the rejection when you're doing something like that. The other piece is about the immigration that you didn't touch on, and is about the black market of immigration papers and the black market of immigration lawyers. And pieces of how you find information about immigration, and how people don't go to his office to ask for help until they're in trouble, because they really know that there are not many options until they have a fun white light about, oh, maybe I got married, maybe I can do something now. And it's hard always to get there and say, hey, that's not it. So I'm married to this US citizen. And my husband, for example, is a US citizen, and my immigration process was fairly straightforward. We didn't have to do any hoops and loops, and I was pretty okay. And my husband, US citizen, didn't really like it. He was very upset. Why do we have to do this? Well, yeah, that's the process. Why do we have to go to, why is he asking me this? This is nothing, honey, really.
Yeah, there is this issue. I think just I think clients want to be, there's just an element of human dignity, and I think sometimes paying for the service is one way to express that. Okay, it's 10 o'clock, so we're out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.